At Federalist 74 by Hamilton. It's one of the shortest Federalist Papers, and it has to deal with the power of pardon, granting reprieves and pardons that has been given to the President in the Constitution. And also the fact that he's going to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Now, for you as immigrants or English learners, there's one thing that's unfortunately being used in the media in the United States, that they constantly refer to the President as Commander-in-Chief. He's not the Commander-in-Chief of this country. He's the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And since we did not have an Air Force back then, all it says, as the paper starts reading, and I'll start reading it, the President of the United States is to be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. So as you one day hopefully become U.S. citizen, you might want to write to these silly broadcasters or even writers that call the President Commander-in-Chief. I know they've got lazy and they want to say Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, but they don't. And there's a big mistake there, because psychologically you grant more honor and power to the President. And this is not how the system is set up. The system has been set up with three different branches: the legislative branch, judicial branch, executive branch. And unfortunately, we see the legislative branch has been very docile. They have not been very thoughtful. They've not been very wise, and we see it right now. Anyways, just don't want to comment on it too much. So let me go ahead and continue reading here. The propriety of this provision is so evident in itself, and it is at the same time so consonant to the precedents of state constitutions in general, that little need to be said to explain or enforce it. Even those of them which have in other respects coupled the chief magistrate with a council have for the most part concentered the military authority in him alone. So he says this is going to be an easy one, because when you look at the state constitutions, they have done the same thing. They've said in times of emergency, you go to the governor, the chief magistrate of the state. Even the ones that a lot of times have to coordinate or get counseled by the council doing certain things, he says in times of emergency, pretty much the governor or the chief magistrate of the state has the authority to do a lot of things. So he says this Constitution, as far as armed forces go, as far as Army and Navy go, we've done the same thing. So there's not much explanation that needs to be done here. Of all the cares or concerns of government, the direction of war most peculiarly demands those qualities which distinguish the exercise of power by a single hand. The direction of war implies the direction of the common strength, and the power of directing and employing the common strength forms an usual and essential part in the definition of the executive authority. And most of the people did not have any problems with this, because as he says, it's very much like the power that has been given to the governor in all the 13 states. A little different here and there, but this part is not much different. Okay. The next one is obvious too, because his cabinet are responsible to him. Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary of, now they call it Secretary of State. Back then it was Secretary of Foreign Affairs in Treasury, on and on and on. They are responsible to okay things with the president. And he says here, the president may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. Back then, when they started with 3 departments. Department of War, Treasury, and State, Foreign Affairs. And now we have so many because the population is so large, because we have now 50 states, and this is a huge land. So obviously we'll have to have more departments in the executive branch. Next paragraph, he is also to be authorized to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in the case of impeachment. Humanity and good policy conspire to dictate that the benign prerogative of pardoning should be as little as possible fettered or embarrassed. The criminal code of every country partakes so much of the necessary severity that without an easy access to exceptions in favor of unfortunate guilt, justice would wear a countenance too sanguinary and cruel. This is the part that we'll have to just remember what we've said in the past Federalists. Remember, he is always doubtful, has doubts about groups of people. Publius, all 3 of them, Hamilton, Jay, and Madison, say human beings might be good, but human beings with power in their hands, with delegated power, you cannot trust them. And as you can see over these papers, he's always said, even our own representatives, when they get together, they cannot be necessarily trusted. And that's why we have this separation of powers and checks and balances and all these stuff. So because of that, he's going to say there will come times where we need to grant pardons and reprieves. Even though some people say the legislature is a good place for these pardons to be reviewed and granted, he says, well, when you have a group of people together, what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, if we do something wrong, then I can always pass on the blame to somebody else. So they don't make the right decisions just because of that. And then the other part is that if they do something right, or they want to do something right in the eyes of their constituents, they might just overshoot and just go crazy and do something that's not wise because they want to take the credit. They just want to say you're strong-willed, strong-minded. They might make a decision that is horrible for the country. So he says, because of this, I believe that giving the power of pardon to the president and one single person would be the right thing, because he will always sit down and think wisely. It's only me. I'm the one who's going to be getting the credit or blamed. I can't pass it to anybody else. So he'll be thoughtful and tries to be wise. And another part we'll get to see here, that he will say there are times that it is important that you immediately or within a day you grant pardon or reprieve somebody, because strategically it might be extremely important. And he brings up the Daniel Shays' rebellion and a few other things. Even in the first term of the presidency of George Washington, there was a whiskey rebellion. and Washington ended pardoning a few people. Because sometimes you just don't want to be a butcher and kill everybody. Maybe you can punish a couple of people so that other people will learn a lesson. But if you go too far, then strategically it might just work against you. So that's what he's going to talk about. He says it is better to leave this power in the hands of one person, again, because that one person will think hard and deeply into what is beneficial strategically for the country. So I will try to finish this paragraph real quick. As the sense of responsibility is always strongest in proportion as it is undivided, it may be inferred that a single man would be most ready to attend to the force of those motives which might plead for a mitigation of the rigor of the law, and least apt to yield to considerations which were calculated to shelter a fit object of its vengeance. The reflection that the fate of a fellow creature depended on his sole fiat would naturally inspire scrupulousness and caution. The dread of being accused of weakness or connivance would beget equal circumspection, though of a different kind. So see, he says, the president knows he's just a single person making this decision. He'll look at both sides of this equation and try to think and decide as wisely as possible. Whereas in a group of people, they can always say, I can pass the blame or I can get most of the credit. So they'll just either go, they might just go to the extremes. So it looks like we'll continue this paragraph and the rest of this paper in just the next video.